evening, Brookline Booksmith. I want to welcome everybody to our Authors Event Series at Brookline Booksmith. This evening we are featuring, as you can tell, Rachel Barenbaum and her book. And we are featuring the book that just came out today in paperback. So, before we hear from everybody this evening, we request that you keep your mobile phones on silent during the event. And if you haven't yet picked up your pre-ordered book, or if you would like to buy a copy, I will be standing back there ready to sell them to you. And then you can take your new fresh copy and have it signed right here at the front. You'll just make a nice little line that goes down these art books all the way into the cookbook section, and it shall be a delightful time. I do want to warn you, we are live streaming this event, so if you don't want to walk in front of the camera, unless you are happy to be on the interwebs. And yes, and we have a wonderful, really cool person, Evie Bartels, who is here to introduce our author and speaker this evening. So I want to welcome Evie to the stage.
All right, welcome to the paperback launch of Atomic Anna. So I am Evie Bartels. I'm super honored that Rachel asked me to introduce this event. And when she asked me to do the introduction, she was like, you can just read the bios and call it a day. And I was like, absolutely not. So I want to talk a little bit about how awesome Rachel is. So first, I think many of you already know this because you're all here to celebrate her, but Rachel is fantastic, both as a person and a writer. She is a force to be reckoned with. She is a prolific writer and book reviewer whose work has appeared in publications such as the LA Review of Books, Harper's Bazaar, and more. She has degrees from Harvard in business and literature and philosophy, and also casually, she is an elected town meeting member in Brookline. Plus, as you probably already know, she is the author of two, not one, two novels. First, we have A Bend in the Stars. So Rachel's debut, A Bend in the Stars, was named a New York Times Summer Reading Selection and a Barnes & Noble Discover Great New Writers Selection, and it was a Boston Globe bestseller. Then we have, the reason we're all here tonight, Atomic Anna, Rachel's second novel. The New York Times Book Review said the novel is masterfully plotted. The LA Review of Books called it propulsive and intimate. In a starred Kirkus review, the reviewer wrote, this book is an incredible achievement, as ambitious as a Greek tragedy and just as lyrical and unflinching. In a starred review from Publishers Weekly, the editors wrote, Barenbaum burnishes her reputation as an up-and-coming talent with his audacious time travel story. Barenbaum dares greatly and succeeds. The novel was nominated for a Goodreads Choice Award in 2022 and was named an Honor Book Award by the Association of Jewish Libraries for their 2022 Fiction Award. Yeah, let's clap again. So the thing I really want to emphasize, though, is that more than just being an incredible writer and friend and person, Rachel is really an advocate for people. And her novels lift up stories of often underrepresented voices. She writes about women, she writes about immigrants, she writes about Jews and addicts and all kinds of people. And not only that, though, she is an incredible literary citizen, as you all probably know. Actually, quick show of hands. Raise your hand if Rachel Barenbaum has ever helped you in any way as a writer. Yes, okay, great. Thank you, Rachel. She is always taking time to talk up her friends' writing and their books, and promoting and supporting and encouraging and cheering everyone on. She is a super invaluable member of many literary communities, including the fact that she is a scholar in residence at the Hadassah Brandeis Institute at Brandeis, and she's also a graduate of Grub Street's Novel Incubator Program. And she also has a whole podcast called Check This Out, sponsored by the Howe Library and A Mighty Blaze, which features new and diverse writers. So Rachel is just the absolute best, and I'm so excited we get to celebrate her tonight. And joining her in conversation is another literary force to be reckoned with, Christopher Castellani. Chris is the author of 4 novels, most recently Leading Men, which is for sale in the back, for which he received fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, MacDowell, and the Massachusetts Cultural Council, among others. His book of essays on narration and fiction, The Art of Perspective, Who Tells the Story, was published by Grey Wolf in 2016. Christopher's on the faculty and academic board of the Warren Wilson MFA program and chairs the writing panel for the National Young Arts Foundation. And for this academic year, 2022-2023, he is the writer in residence at Brandeis. He lives in Boston and Provincetown. Please put your hands together for Rachel and Chris.
Wow, thank you, Evie. Oh my God. It's so amazing to see all of you here. Thank you so, so much. It's a very different kind of event because a lot of times at events I don't know anybody. And here I know like everybody and a lot of my mentors and so many writers that I look up to are here. And I'm so, so grateful that they're here. And thank you. And Chris in particular has been a mentor of mine for years now. And I have gone to him, right? And one of the best pieces of advice that he gave me was, do the events that you want to do that are going to be fun. So of course, when I knew I was going to do this, I called Chris, right, to ask if he would help me be up here because what would be more fun than being in conversation with Chris. So thank you so much, and thank you, Evie, and oh my God, and Hank is one of my huge, huge mentors, and I'm just a huge fan of hers, so thank you. And all the other writers out there, thanks for being here. So Atomic Anna, she's been out for a year, but we're here to celebrate the paperback. Because as writers, we don't get that many chances to celebrate. It's true, we get a lot of rejection. I think we all know that every day. But then we get some wins, so we come and celebrate them. Woo! Right? So thank you. So both of my books really are centered on, and I start them with my sort of ideas that I grew up with that I got from these 2 great aunts who were at my house pretty much every Friday night for dinner. So my own grandmother passed away when I was very young, and her sisters stepped in, and they came every Friday night. And I loved them very, very much, but they were a little bit scary. They were very big. They smelled like Manischewitz and herring, and right, and I loved them, but they would call me over because I was the oldest, and when they would show up, and they'd be like, Rachel, right, and they would bend over, and I'm ready. What is it? And they would say, do you know where the passports are? Do you know where the emergency money is? I would say yes, because that was my job, right? I was the oldest, and they would say, good. We ran, we might have to run again. And you need to always be ready. So this is how I grew up, and this is what I write about a lot in Atomic Anna and in A Bend in the Stars. This question of when do we run, right? When do we run? How do you know? I mean, that moment is terrifying. I feel lucky that I've never had to make that decision, right? Where you're ready to give up everything, right? Just leave a language you love, a country you love, and go. So that moment is really what starts in both of my books. Atomic Anna itself starts in Chernobyl. And I always tell people, right, the elevator pitch, it's a story of 3 generations of women who worked together to build a time machine that they used to stop Chernobyl. But really, it's about family. It's about love. Right? The time machine, this idea of time travel, is really about how to deal with regret and what do we want to change and how do we move forward. So Atomic Anna opens in April 26, 1986 in the Soviet Union, and it starts, the scientist Anna Barkova was asleep in her narrow bed in Pripyat, the closed city that housed workers from Chernobyl. She was cold, but then again, she was always cold. The walls in her building were thin. Damp and wind clawed through cracks, and she huddled under blankets to escape them. She'd fallen asleep working on the amplifier she hoped would increase efficiency at the nuclear power plant, the prototype lying on her chest. It was small and crude, a circuit board covered with diodes and capacitors. She didn't hear the explosion or feel the catastrophic shudder as reactor number 4 ripped apart, its insides flayed, releasing the most dangerous substances known to man. Nor did she witness the shock of light that stabbed the dark, because at that exact moment, Anna tore through time. It was her first jump, and it was an accident. So why Chernobyl? Why do I start at Chernobyl? So we go back to these great aunts, right, that I had. And back in 1986, when Chernobyl happened, when the terrible accident happened, I have this very clear memory of my two great aunts being at the house, and it was time to watch the news. And this is back in the days, right, when you have to go to the TV, and we were in Philly, you turn it to channel 6, right, I have to adjust the antenna for them. We sit down on the couch, and I'm sandwiched between them, right, and it's like I'm, squished between them, and the news comes on, and this horrible, horrible accident has happened. And I just remember, I was very young, and until that point, I had thought an accident was you fall down, you skin your knee, whatever, you accidentally bump your brother, who's over there, right? But no, when it's a grown-up accident, it can actually be something so much worse, people who are going to die, right? And so it's this moment that's just, it's rocking my world. And the one aunt, she leans over to the other, and she says, if a woman had been in charge, that never would have happened. So I have that in my head, these two women talking about a woman needing to be in charge, and I thought, that's the book I'm writing, right? I'm gonna write about Chernobyl, and I'm gonna have a woman in charge, and that's Anna Barkova. So let's go and talk a little bit about time, because of course, as I said, this whole book is framed with this notion of time travel. I have been obsessed with the notion of time for years, since college, since I walked into my very first philosophy class. And I feel like a lot of you are my friends, so you've probably heard me talking about time. I'm that obsessed with it. But the first time I walked into a philosophy class, the professor says, "What is time?" Right? And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, oh my God, right? Minutes, hours, seconds, come on. And she says, no, time is entirely made up. It doesn't exist anywhere in the world, right? We agreed to use the measurements of minutes, hours, and seconds so we could all agree to be here. But time isn't real. And that sort of blew my mind, right? I've been obsessed with this idea of time ever since, and this leads to Einstein and general relativity, right? And this whole notion, you've probably heard someone say, well, time is relative, right? And he comes up with these theories about how if you stand on the event horizon of a black hole for what you think is 10 minutes, and then you can magically transport yourself back to Earth, maybe 100, 200 years have passed. Time is relative. So I thought that's where my time machine is coming from, right? And that's really where I kick off. So the book is framed by the time machine, but then it's also framed by these 3 generations of women. So we have Anna Barkova herself, who is in Chernobyl, and she is then transported, she builds her time machine on Mount Aragat in what is now present-day Armenia, and I describe a cosmic ray station. The cosmic ray station in the book is real. I didn't even make that up. You can look on my website, you can see pictures of it. It still exists, and there's still some sort of gatekeepers that are up there to keep people out of the, sort of the buildings and the computers, right, from like the 1980s when it was built, but it's all there, it's all still real. And Anna, that's where I really set the book, and you can see some of those amazing pictures. So that's the first generation, and you see her struggling, and you see her figuring out where she fits in the world and what her time machine is going to do. And then we have the second generation, which is her daughter, Manya, who then becomes Molly. She sends Molly with her best friend to America. So she's not the mother. There are big questions about motherhood in here, and I've actually talked about that a little before. But this middle generation, very importantly, is focused on comic books. Because Molly sees the world in terms of black and white and color, right? She sees it as an artist, where her mom sees the world in terms of physics. So it's a very different sort of framing for the world. And comic books in particular are really exciting because when Molly was growing up in this time period in the 70s, we are in the heart of the second wave of feminism. I love this movement, right? This is where we have women for the first time can sign for mortgages and bank accounts and freedom to choose. Sadly, some of this is being repealed. But at the time, right, this freedom that women are having for the first time is built into Molly's character. And I have a real life comic book hero, artist, I should say. Trina Robbins is sort of the focus of this chapter. She's a real life person. I actually got to send her a copy of the book. She wrote back to me. She loved it. That was super fun. But we have Molly, and she draws these comic books. And the comic books are used to communicate between the generations. So Anna uses her time machine and drops them off with Molly's own daughter, right? And they go back and forth, and this is how they talk. So I'm going to read just a little bit about how Molly discovers comic books. When her tears were gone, she looked up at the webbed cracks in the ceiling, 100 lines crooked across the old plaster, and she remembered the comic books from the baker. Molly pulled her flashlight out from under the corner of her mattress and began reading. Mary and her twin brother, Captain Marvel, were separated at birth. At the age of 12, they were reunited, and Mary realized her superpowers. While both used the same word, Shazam, to invoke those powers, her brother's powers came from Solomon, Hercules, Atlas, Zeus, Achilles, and Mercury, right, Shazam, while Mary's came from Selena, Hippolyta, Ariadne, Zephyrus, Aurora, and Minerva. A comic book with a powerful girl at the center and all kinds of superhero adventures took her mind off the anger. Molly read page after page. And so that's the beginning of the middle journey in this book, these comic books, and we see women at the center. So until this time in comic books, starting with the Green Lantern, women were actually thrown into refrigerators in comic books. Like, I'm not even making that up, right? Literally thrown into refrigerators. And there's actually a book, a backlash that came out called The Refrigerator Monologues. It came out about 6 or 7 years ago of current, like modern women in comics standing up against these refrigerators. And this notion that women have to be fighting each other over men, right? Or jealousy is really the heart of their superpowers or their super fights. So no, that's not what Molly sees. It's not what Trina saw. It's not what's in the book. And it is this heart of the second wave of feminism. And I'm pretty obsessed with it. So you're gonna see it in the book, and you'll probably hear me talk about it a lot. So then the third generation of the, oh no, I don't wanna lose that place. All right. It's all well marked up for talks. Okay, so the third generation of the book is Molly's own daughter, Raisa. So Molly has a very troubled, hard life, let's say. She goes through a lot with her comic books, but then she falls to drugs and addiction, and that is sort of a centerpiece of the book and what that means for her life. And then she has her daughter, Raisa, and she ends up not being able to raise her. So the third generation begins in Philadelphia in September of 1987. When Raisa was 16 years old, she had been living with her grandparents for 6 years in a slice of northeast Philly they called Little Russia. The streets were lined with row homes, separated by walls so thin there was no privacy, and invisible borders so thick she didn't need to use a word of English until she stepped into a classroom at school. She never saw her mother because she'd been told she was still in prison, and Raisa refused to visit. Papa was long dead, and now Raisa passed every waking hour either at school or with her grandparents working at their store, the Russian market. She oscillated between the two worlds on a schedule set by the school bell and a pair of church bells recorded in Moscow that blared on the Russian radio station her grandmother played at all hours. "Please, no more meat or broth, I have to go," Raisa said to her babushka. She pushed the bowl away. She was due at a math competition in 2 hours, and if she didn't leave soon, she'd be late. They were seated in the kitchen at their formica table, so close together their knees knocked. The whole space was cramped like that. The refrigerator was flush with the stove, which nestled against a counter that in turn spilled into a sink only 1 plate wide. Babushka often complained she didn't have room to breathe while she cooked, but Raisa liked the lack of space, knowing her grandmother was close. It was the only thing that helped her calm down, and she needed that. So that's all I'm gonna read for now. And I'm gonna leave it there, and we're gonna go to Q&A with the amazing Chris Castellani. Thanks so much for everybody for being here, and to the Booksmith for having me. Bye, Copy, Get Greif, Leading Men, Atomic Anna, buy all of our books. Formal coming over here to the table, yeah.
First of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
This is so exciting, and I'm so happy to be here with you tonight. As I was saying, we do get so few. Can anyone hear me? Yeah, we get so few opportunities to do this, right? We get the hardcover, we get the paperback. Sometimes you don't even get both, right?
Yeah.
And here you've had, now this is the fourth. I believe this is your fourth launch, right?
Yeah.
So that's truly like thrilling moment, and I just wanted to, the main reason I'm here is really just to be another voice here to say congratulations. Because I'm so proud of you and so excited for you. So I wanted to start though by asking about now that it is your fourth launch, like what do you know now about all of this, about writing and publishing, about promoting, about doing events like this? Like what do you know now about this that you didn't know at the beginning?
I feel like I should ask you that.
I'm asking you because I don't know.
I know, right? I mean, I would say like the best thing, the most exciting thing is the writing, right? I still love the writing. That's why I do this. That's why I'm up here. But the thrill of publishing a book just never gets old, right?
Good.
And so I think that's sort of the biggest lesson, because sometimes I look at, very famous authors and I think, aren't they, right? Like, is this sort of, are they going through, right? Do they know everything they're doing? And first of all, they don't, because we're always learning, right? And second of all, it's just as exciting to be here tonight and seeing all of you guys. So thank you.
Great. And so in terms of so between when this book first came out and now, I'm guessing that you've had experiences where people have written to you, or people have, shared stories with you about things that the book inspired or reminded them of, or made them think about, or whatever. So I'm curious if there are any. These are not questions we discussed ahead of time, just FYI. So you may not be ready for these, but I'm just curious if there's any particular note or just experience you had along the way between the hardcover and now that stands out for you, either positively or negatively,
Yeah. So I'd say some of the best experiences that I've had. I mean, first of all, I love it when people have already read the book, right? And they want to know, tell me about this specific event, right? Or this scene, and that's amazing. Right? Because usually I tell people, just buy the book, you don't have to read it. But when they actually read it, right? That's a pretty big moment. But I think some of my favorite moments are when there'll be someone in the audience who's like, I'm a physicist, and I would love to talk to you about your theory on time travel and where you veered away from Einstein, right? And sometimes they get a little intense because I'm like, I made it up. I didn't actually follow all of Einstein, right? And they can't actually give you formulas for time travel. But sometimes I have audience members who really want to dig into that science. And it's a little intimidating, but also pretty amazing that they're reading it that closely, right?
Yeah.
And they want to really talk about, why that's time travel.
Yeah, no, you're one of the few authors that I know that can actually speak intelligently about science or anything other than, than writing or than, I don't know, teaching at a university or something. So I was curious whether, how much of that you've had to deal with in terms of people wanting or thinking that, because I've had this experience too, whenever you put anything in your books that is, not something that seems like it's directly pulled from your life, people assume that you're an expert on it. So you're like the Chernobyl person, you're like the Russia person, you're you're the time travel person, you're the comic book person, or you're all these things that you put in so much in this book it's a very it's something that I think invites people to then want to ask you about. So I'm wondering if you've had experiences like that where people then, I think I remember last year when you had the hardcover, it was around the time of the Russia-Ukraine war, and people were asking you about it, and I think I remember you saying well, I'm not an expert on these things, but I guess how has it felt to be sort of thrown into those kinds of conversations?
Right. So I mean, it's a terrible coincidence that the war started, right? Just as this book was coming out, and it's placed in Ukraine, right? And in Armenia, Mount Aragats, these are fraught regions. Yeah. So I do get asked a lot, what do you think about the war and what's happening now? And it's a terrible thing, right? It really is. And I guess what sticks out to me the most is that a lot of soldiers have been pushed through Chernobyl, which is still radioactive, is still very dangerous. And they've been exposed to all kinds of radiation. They'll probably die or have horrible cancers, and Russia didn't care, right? They still pushed the soldiers through, so that's been pretty horrific. On a much lighter note, before the war broke out, you could actually take like a tourist visit to Chernobyl.
Wow.
And they would put you in these like radioactive suits, and you would get your 5 minutes that you could like go walk past whatever zone. And people would ask me if I was going to do this. And I was like, why? Right? No, the answer is no.
Yeah, right.
I do not want to actually go to
Right.
Chernobyl now
Yeah,
and
yeah,
see
yeah.
it. So, no.
Have you spent much time though in Russia and Ukraine?
Yeah. So I have not. I've actually never been. So those two great aunts that I grew up with, they forbid us to ever go. They always said, right, we left. There's a reason we left. And actually, I've had the chance to talk to a lot of synagogues, a lot of JCCs, Jewish Community Center book groups, and they always talk about how, we were pushed out of Ukraine. People didn't want Jews in Ukraine. So, like, why would we go visit now? Right? This is a very common, and of course I'm a grown up now, and I could have gone, right? But I have these, like, my aunts in my head, right? Like, we left.
Right.
Do not go back. What if you can't get out?
Yeah.
Right? And it doesn't make any sense. It's not rational, but it's, it's like in me that I can't go there.
Yeah.
So I'm working through that.
Yeah. Well, you've gone there quite a different way, right?
Right.
And you've gone there with this, and I love how you started with that story about your aunts, because it brought up that question of, that I feel this is like the origin of almost all the things that we write, which is that question of what if, right? What if a woman had run, the plant? Like, what if this had happened? What if this had happened? I just thought that was such a nice way to frame all of this, because that is where all of our stories sort of tend to start, and I feel like it's a great honor, to them that you wrote this story, which is in obviously many ways because of them.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
yeah. And okay, so you've already, I had a question about your interest in science and how that led you to write your book. So you've sort of touched on those, and you touched a bit on time travel, but you make time travel though it's really thrilling in the book, it's also very sort of painful physically and emotionally. So I was curious, what's that about? Like, why did you do that?
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you. So Anna, every time that she goes through her time machine, she is hurt because it's not working properly. She needs to readjust her angle of travel. Again, I made this all up, right? Like, the waves aren't quite right. So I can,
what does she know that we don't know?
Right.
This is amazing.
Right. So as I made this, right, so the time machine actually physically is killing her, right? And so that is a much bigger metaphor. I love, right?
Yeah.
I love when people want to talk about this, right? Of like, do we want to go back and deal with our past? Like, will it kill us, right? Is it holding us back? Can we look for help? Because eventually, to fix her machine, she needs to work with her granddaughter, and she needs to work with her daughter. She needs to repair those relationships. So, the machine doesn't stop killing her until she's basically faced her past. So, sort of a bigger metaphor there. And it's, I don't know, I guess it seemed, as I was writing it, I was like, is this metaphor too obvious? Sometimes some of you writers might know this, right? Like, am I really, is it too much? But I think maybe it worked.
Oh, absolutely, because, as it certainly didn't work. It worked because as you're talking, I'm like, oh yeah, oh my God. Because, that it's so tempting to, to dream about that kind of thing. Like, what would I do if I could go back and change it all and make it right, but as you point out, sort of so skillfully, like, you touch one thing and it unravels all of these other things, and you create all kinds of other types of hurt and harm, and you're healing one thing but you're hurting another.
Yeah.
And that certainly resonates with just how we all think about wanting to go back and change things.
Yeah.
So I really appreciated that book.
Thank you. I love that, because I really think of time travel and a time machine as the ultimate weapon, right? Because you could go back in time and erase an entire generation just because you choose to cross the street, right? At a different time, or you bump into someone you didn't mean to bump into, and then they don't meet their future spouse, right? And then you've destroyed an entire generation. So it's a weapon. And I love time travel, right? Like, I love all of the books, the movies, the shows, but I've always been frustrated that people don't talk about it as a weapon, or rarely discussed as a weapon.
That's really
It's usually romanticized.
Yeah.
right?
Were there any books or films about time travel that were particularly helpful to you, or even like, I don't know, is there like scientific writing about time travel that is useful?
There is.
Okay.
There is. I mean, there are actual
Yeah.
physicists, right,
Right.
who really write about this stuff
Right.
and like, what does it mean?
Right.
But it's not this romantic notion of let's go back 50 years and say you're sorry type thing. It's more the general relativity. I know. It's more the general relativity of if you're, how you experience it near a black hole versus, wherever. But yeah, I would say that I've read lots of time travel books and watched lots of TV and stuff. And one thing that always sticks out to me is I used to watch this TV show called Stargate. I really loved Stargate. And I remember watching an interview with the cast on like their, 10th anniversary or something, right? That's right, I'm this nerdy, right? Stargate, Star Trek. And the lead actor was like, this portal, this is the best prop you could ever have. Because the idea is that they have this portal and you activate it and you can go through to any world, anywhere that you can imagine. And I just thought that time machine is also the best prop you could ever have, right? Because it can just take you anywhere. So it's not, again, it's like that metaphor of where do you want to go with the time machine. It's not literally the hardcore sci-fi trope that, you can definitely find in other books.
Right. Cool. So were there other, so I was curious about books too, like if there are other, I know that there's Star Trek and Stargate, but were there other books that you found interesting in this regard? Or
Yeah, I mean, I love them. Like, I love The Time Traveler's Wife, right? Because it's more fictional. Diana Gabaldon, right? The Outlander series.
I was just about to say,
Yes.
I haven't read. My partner's addicted to that show.
Yeah.
I've never seen it.
Oh yeah, so they're amazing books. But again, they're like sci-fi light. I mean, I've read, the more hardcore stuff, but those books I like to bring out as examples because really you read those for love, right? You read them because you want the love story.
Right.
And you want to know, you want to root for characters, right? It's not just let's go find aliens or the dinosaurs, right? Or like, H.G. Wells, like the traditional, right? They're more in that vein. So I think those are, I like to talk.
I mean, again, that's what I love so much about your book is that it's as much about all that you've said about changing history and all that stuff, but ultimately the time travel relates directly to the emotional connections among the characters. It works on both those levels, and that's to me what makes it, quote unquote, worthy of the novel. It's not just a trick, right? It actually has these thematic, resonances with everything in the book.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things I love about your books too, is it's about love, right? Like, so many of us want to read about love, right? Yes, the relationship.
So this is maybe related, but I was so fascinated by the comics that Molly makes, and I love. If any of you haven't seen the actual comics that were made from the book, like those are the coolest things I've ever seen. And that was like, I think you had them on display like last time we were here, right?
Yeah.
But they're online and all of that. You absolutely have to check those out because those were super cool. But I was thinking about this that's a form of, what Molly does is sort of a form of myth making, about her family, about her mother, and all these things, and sort of how we both like accept and question the stories that are told to us about our families and our ancestors, and how especially immigrants like both kind of revere those stories and resist them at the same time, and we kind of want to make something new out of them, which is kind of what you've done with the stories that your aunts told you, in this book. This is not actually a question. This was like a Terry Gross question where like I'm like making a point. I'm saying like, isn't that interesting? But tell me how interesting that is.
Very.
Right? But I'm like sort of wondering but I am wondering sort of how that relates to history itself, and sort of this idea of like rewriting history, like that chance that she gets to like tell a different story than the one that was told to her, but one that is still related to her.
Yeah.
So.
Really interesting. Such a good question. No, it was, because it gives me the chance to talk about one of the things that I'm obsessed with and I talk about in the book a lot is this idea of, how do we each describe a situation? each of us might go home tonight and tell a different story about what happened, right? Like maybe you're going to talk about how you didn't get a seat, or like, you know, the lighting was good, or I don't know, right? Your friend was late, you know, the microphones or whatever. Everyone has a different story. So what is the true story? How do you talk about tonight accurately? And we talk a lot about, well, history, you know, the victor writes history, but you can look at it in a smaller picture when you're in a family. Who decides how the family, right, lived through that moment or that event? And so for Molly, she gets to describe it through her comic books, right? And she draws, this is how I saw it. But then her mother reads them and is like, that's not what happened, right? And I have this with my own kids. I'll say, this is what happened, and they'll say, no, Mom, right? I mean, that's so common, and I love to be able to put that into a book, because I just think it's a fascinating way to think about a situation, to tell a story, right? To have all those different perspectives.
This is why nobody wants a writer in the family, right? Because we're going to tell our stories, or tell the story, tell a version of the family story in a way that other people may not quite agree with.
Right. Like I was talking to my cousins about my great aunts, right? And you know, do you remember them asking you about the passports?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, no. What do you mean?
Right.
Right? I was like, well, because that was my job.
Right. Wow.
Right.
Wow. Yeah, because none of us have the same experience in our family that
Right.
our siblings do.
Right.
We all grew up with different parents. Yeah.
Right.
It's a good segue to the mothering question. So that there are many different types of mothering in this book. You can almost think of Anna as sort of trying to like mother the whole world, you know, by saving it, or by saving this, you know, all of these people. So I wonder if you can just talk about mothering, and maybe how your own experience as a mother shaped some of the emotional arcs of this book.
Yes, mothers. It's a huge theme in this book, also in Bend in the Stars. And really, you know, what I try to challenge or question in Atomic Anna is, you know, do we have to be parents? Do we have to be mothers, right? So Anna chooses to give her child away. She never even wanted to be pregnant. She didn't want the child. Her best friend and first love, Yulia, only wanted a child, right? That's all she ever wanted. And after Anna gives birth, she goes back to work very quickly. She says, I want to just go back to the lab. I don't want to be a mother. And she's criticized for it, right? And lots of people are saying, no, you don't. You want to be home with your child. And her, you know, her husband, of course, is trying to say, you need to be home with our child. It's been upsetting to some of my readers. You know, they're like, why are you putting her back to work? And we say, well, if she was a man, you would have been applauding her, right, for going straight back to work and for having such a supportive spouse. So in the end, she gives her child away to Yulia, and she doesn't even take on that mantle, right? So do you have to be a mother just because you're a woman? And this is a big question in the book, and what does it mean? And so then Yulia becomes the mother for Molly, and then for Raisa too, right? So for 2 generations, so a grandmother as a mother also, or a grandfather who's also a figure in both of those lives. So I've loved the conversations that have come out around motherhood in this book, and to see the reaction, because some people really hate Anna for that. They keep reading, you know, but they're angry.
Well, there's that first moment where she goes back, where she jumps back to Philadelphia at the very beginning, and you know, and she sees her daughter, you know, and she's like, oh yeah, anyway, the daughter's there. Anyway, let me tell you about the reactor or whatever. And they're like, wait, your daughter's like right here, you know, and you've jumped in time, and your daughter's there. And she's like, yeah, I know, whatever. I don't have time to deal with this, you know. And I remember thinking of that was sort of an extraordinary moment, you know, and it does kind of foreground how like her great love. She may have had these other loves and other passions, but her real great love is her work, you know, and that is continually questioned. It sounds like by readers and by the other people in the book, and I think that's sort of slightly, I wouldn't say even not radical, but it's a position that you seem to be taking with her, you know, the title character, and that you wanted to say something about that.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I've had a lot of people love her for it too, right?
Exactly.
Because they, you know, they'll say, oh, no one ever writes a woman this way. They only write men this way. Right? So it's good to finally see a woman who's going to go straight back to work and live that way, right? So, yeah.
And she's, I mean, would you say that, I mean, she's obsessive, right? I mean, she certainly,
is.
right?
Yeah.
And I feel like there's some kind of connection between her kind of obsessiveness and, I mean, I don't know, I haven't worked this out yet, but like Molly's addictions, and I was sort of curious about your thought process about about each of these women, the main women in the story, and kind of the thing that is front and center for them, and if they're kind of related in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things one common trait that you can see in this family is this obsessive nature, right? But it's not obsessive necessarily always in a bad way, right? It's being able to sort of focus, like hyper-focused on career, or hyper-focused on, right, your comics, or drugs, right, or math, or your love, and so really that is sort of the bond of the family, right? And again, I think that I felt like we don't talk about addiction as much as I would like to, because it's everywhere, right? Everybody knows an addict, whether you're aware of it or not. So why aren't we putting that out there, right? And can it change? And one of the questions that I got a lot is, well, in the end, it's not really a spoiler here, but maybe a little bit, no matter how many times you change, Molly's still an addict, right? That doesn't change.
Right.
And that also has been, a great conversation point in this book, and one that I was really insistent on never changing that, right?
How did people want you to change? Meaning, like, they wanted her to be saved or redeemed or something like that?
Right.
Yeah.
Like, she wasn't going to, fall. She wasn't going to have that first drink or take that first hit. Right. She was never going to do that.
Well, I see.
Yeah.
And they probably wanted Anna to save her from that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I see,
Yeah.
And make that her mission.
Right.
Versus this other thing.
Right. Versus work.
Yeah. That makes sense. So I'm curious about the. Are we okay with time? Sorry. Oh, how many? Is that 6 minutes? You're good. Okay. Oh my God. Okay.
Wow. So
Sorry.
people have questions.
Yeah.
Too.
Well, I have 1,000 questions here, but we have also so many people in the audience. So let's transition to that. And if somehow nobody has questions, I have many more questions that I can ask you. So are there other questions?
Everyone's quiet.
Yes. Yes. Phoebe.
So you did a ton of research for this book, obviously, but was there any one particular fact or thing that got cut that you wish had stayed in?
Wow, that's a good question. Was there any fact that got cut that I wish had stayed in? I wrote a lot more about Einstein in the book, and a lot more about general relativity, because like I said, I'm a nerd and I really like the science. And my editor was like, nope, cut. And I will also say that for those of you that have read or will read the book, the next to last chapter was actually the very first chapter that I wrote at all. And this is where Anna goes back and meets her own mother, Xenia. And it was 120 pages of that. And then I realized that I kept wanting to fast forward to Chernobyl. And so, this is the painful moment where you just cut it all, right? And fast forward to Chernobyl. So Michelle Hoover, right, always likes to say, you write to get to the beginning, right? So I wrote to get to the beginning. And so then the 120 pages became 5 or 6.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Was that the main editing? Because that was going to be my question actually about the editing of this book. Was that the biggest choice that you made in the editing, or was after it got to the editor or your agent or your editor, were there other big changes that happened in the book? It's such a complicated narrative with so many different threads. I can imagine. I've heard so many times working with writers over the years. They spend all this time writing these complicated, layered narratives with multi-generations, and then the agent or editor says, all right, well, I like the part in the present, but you have to cut everything in the past, or vice versa, right? And I was curious if any of that sort of thing happened here.
Yeah, it was more, I think the first draft that my editor saw was a jumbled mess. It really was, right? And that often happens. And then I think in one of our first meetings, she said to me, I really think this book is Anna's basically sitting in, the cosmic ray station, and then you see the other lives unfolding, and she's dropping into those lives. And then I was like, oh, that's it, right?
Yeah.
That's what's happening in the book. And then I rewrote the book around that.
That makes so much sense because, I'm a terrible reader of any book that isn't just characters sitting around thinking about their lives. If a book has a plot, I can't follow it, And so this book, when I picked it up, I'm like, this is going to be a challenge for me because there's time travel, there's multiple periods, there's history, there's science, there's all this sort of stuff. I'm like, this is not my kind of book. But it was of course the exact opposite, thanks to you.
Thanks
because
for reading.
You made all of it very accessible, very interesting, and I do think that kind of keeping Anna in sort of one place and having it kind of everything refer back to it,
Yeah.
back to that really helped to kind of unify the book and make it you always felt grounded in it when you always felt grounded even though there's all this time travel and all the theories of relativity and
Thank you.
nuclear stuff,
Yeah.
all of that.
When I call my my editor brilliant, like that's what I'm referring to, right?
Well,
like
that's what an editor should do,
right.
Because that's the kind of thing that they should do.
Yeah, and that was literally my first edit from her too, by the way. It was not even like I'm gonna type up or give you page by page, this works, this doesn't. She was like, you're gonna rewrite this book, and this is what's happening.
Yeah.
But it was that sounds crazy, but still I got off the phone and I was like, yes, yes, that's it,
Yeah,
right?
That's a good idea.
Yeah, that's a good editor, right?
Other questions? No. Oh, sorry. I didn't see you.
Did you have like a wall with all the push buttons?
That's totally what I was thinking.
Like detective? Like how did you keep all of those timelines in sync?
So in a former life, I was in finance, and so I grew up in spreadsheets and Excel. So I have a very extensive Excel spreadsheet, and then you can like pivot and you can reorganize it very easily that way. So I don't work with like Post-its and things. I'm an Excel all the way. Yeah, not analog. I know that sounds crazy.
So it comes up from that too, is which book was more fun to write? Was it more fun to write the book that was just like totally like open and you could play with the timeline and you could make things and like, once you had that structure, you could still like move things around, or the straight kind of more traditional historical novel?
Right. So which book was more fun to write? I have to say they were both so different, and I all the characters to me are real people. Like they're in my head, right? Chris and I talked about this a lot when I was like just getting ready to publish Ben in the Stars, because I asked him, I was like, is this crazy if I admit this? And he was like, no, not at all, right? So I'm going to admit it again, right? They're all real to me. So they were both equally amazing because I was hanging out with these people, right? And I'd be sitting there, like, do you want to eat lunch alone? I'm like, I'm not alone, right? Anna's right here. We're hanging out. And it's also sort of how you get to know your characters. So, I mean, I loved writing both of them. So, yeah.
So I think I asked you this, Rachel, about the audiobook and choosing the narrators, because it's very good on Audible, although you should always buy your books here. But if you do, like me, you ordered the book and then you get it on Audible as well. Did you have in your mind how the voices of the different women sounded, and did that affect how you chose the narrators?
So the question is about the audiobook and if I had in my mind how it should sound, or for the characters. No, I feel like I didn't have it, they're in my own head, but for how Hachette wanted to put it together, I was more just so grateful that they're doing it. And they send me 5 of their finalists for each voice. And I got to choose my favorite because it's so much fun. And actually my kids got to sit and listen and we all voted and we're like, this one's terrible, this one's amazing. And then I wrote back and say, these are the ones that I would like, and they honor that. So yeah, but it's really fun.
The closest we'll get to being casting directors.
Right.
Right. Very cool.
Right. We have no power.
Yeah. Hank?
How did writing this book change how you felt about whether you would time travel?
That is such a good question, and actually nobody has asked me that one before. So thank you. I guess when I started writing the book, I had always dreamed about time traveling, like it really had. And then the more I wrote it, the more I realized that it was a weapon. And so then I actually did I pre-recorded my first interview. It was actually with Zibby Owens, right? And it was like, so she records like 3 months before your book drops, right? And she's like, so where would you time travel to? And I was like, I don't ever want to time travel, right? Never. And then she told me, she was so sweet, she's like, you can't say that, right? Like, you need to change that for your book tour, right? Because she could edit it, whatever. And I was like, but I don't have a good answer. And she's like, well, let's talk about it. And then she was like, no, maybe you should say. And it was like funny back and forth, right? So I think that was really what changed it. I don't want to time travel now, that I really want to a lot. I had always thought about it a lot, but now I realize if I do go back to change something, what else am I changing? And it terrifies me. But what I would want to do, I realized, is if I could be like a fly on the wall in a couple of moments, right? Like, so for example, that moment when my family was sitting there in Russia and they said, we're leaving, right? If you could be that fly on the wall to see them, what were they thinking? Or when they first stepped off the boat in Philadelphia, right? Like just to see, there are moments I'd want to see, but not actually time travel to. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you've done the time traveling like as part of the book, and like every book that we write, like we work through all of our psychology about our family, like families and our experiences through different characters and putting them in different situations. We don't even realize we're working out our own shit, right? So
it's all in there.
Yeah, exactly. That's very cool. Other questions? Yeah.
So both these books, you're dealing with multiple points of views, multiple timelines. What draws you to this complexity? And do you think you're going to keep going in that direction? Or do you sometimes lay awake at 3 a.m. and think, God damn it, why don't I just do a simple more protagonist? Because I do.
Right, God damn it, right? The question is why write so many protagonists that make it complicated? Yes, I have often thought about writing that novel that Chris was describing where you're like sitting in a room thinking and then I just get really bored. I don't know, and I sort of think about, what's in there, what's happening. The old, I think we've talked about this too, put the gun in the room, right? Or a gun on the table if nothing's happening. So, I don't know, I guess I don't like to sit still. So I don't like any of my characters to sit still, but I do wish sometimes that I could write a shorter, shorter, more succinct, simple book. Because for both of these books, I've had to cut, 20,000, 25,000 words.
Neither of them are short either, right?
Right.
So it's not even that they're complex; they're also expansive, right?
Right.
Time, or whatever. But novels are so much like about time,
right?
And so that it seems very fitting that you write these kinds of books.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Speaking of that, how long did it take you to write from concept to publication?
So I started this book in 2016, and it sold in 2019. Published, and then lots of editing, right? So I was like, oh, here's my final draft at 150,000 words, and my editor's like, no, we're not publishing more than 120. You have 3 weeks.
Yeah, because these constraints come in about just how much it costs to make a book, right? And and if they can figure out a way to make it shorter, that still has artistic integrity. They will make you do it.
Right, because they have to print the pages, they have to ship it, right? Like all of it. So yeah.
Post editing. So once the book was done, are there in the last year or two themes, moments, or characters that you're now like, I really want to get into this going forward, and whether it's a new book or writing or thoughts that you didn't have when you were cutting it, but now you have like this is a really new moment for me, or a new character, or new characterization that you want to really focus on?
Yeah, that's a great question. So do I have any new characterizations or any sort of different focus or look at this book? I would say the biggest thing that came out of it was so after the book goes to bed, you have this awkward, terrifying 9 months where you're waiting for reviews, right, and bookstore orders. Is anyone going to show up at my book readings? And I spent that time working with some women who are comic book artists now, and Kelly Sue DeConnick, who's this sort of amazing figure in the comic book world and women in comics, and actually getting these artists that Chris was talking about to draw some of the comics that I describe in here. And that's been absolutely amazing, and the reaction to that has been amazing. And so there's some projects sort of in the thought process there. I won't say, right, these things take a while, but I never thought that I would even think about, actually writing a comic book. But now that possibility or a graphic novel has been sort of floated out there, it's not like, I don't have to, I just never would have thought about it, and now it's out there.
That is so cool. It would complete, this is the source material, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Itself to a graphic novel. That's so cool.
Yeah, so if like some of the comic book artists are like, could we take this and run with it? Could you write, I don't draw, but I could write the words and they would draw it, yeah.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah, it's been pretty amazing, so.
What's next for you?
What's next? Always a question, right? So I'm a scholar in residence at the Hadassah Brandeis Institute at Brandeis. Chris is also at Brandeis, although we don't see each other on campus. It's too big, I know. And so I am there working on a book that is based on real life women in 1880s Russia who came together to form a terrorist czar to kill the czar. And they did it. They were the assassins. So there were 4 women at the core of this group who did it, and they've been buried in history. And I came across them when I was doing some research, and I just thought, why don't we know about these women? Why do we know about the men, right? And as Hadassah Brandeis said to me, like, well, that's very classic, and that's why we're gonna fund you to write this book. So it is about the women who assassinated the Tsar. So they literally built the bomb, planted the bomb, ran the safe house, and sort of were the mastermind of the whole thing.
Will this be fictional or fictional?
It is all fictional because sadly there's so little available in the historical record about these women, right? There's a little note like, oh, and by the way, this woman built the bomb and then, she went to prison and she died, but this man, right? And then you see 5 chapters on the guy who was involved, and that's literally all I have on her, right? So then I have to sort of create that story, and I want it to be as accurate, historically accurate as it can be, but I've got to make a lot of it up.
Well, who better to write this book than you? Honestly, when you were talking about it, I'm like, you're born to write that book, just as you were born to write this and then in the stars. I think we have time for just one more question. Yes.
I'm curious because your books involve so much research, whether you do the research in concert with the writing, or whether you and it sort of feed off of each other, or whether you really like to have all of the facts down that you know that you're working with when you start building.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So it's about the research. Do I do a lot of research before and then sit down and write, or am I researching sort of as I go? The answer is mostly I research as I go, right? So I'm like, where am I going to put Anna? Where is she going to build a time machine? And then I happen to be reading, a National Geographic that's featuring this cosmic ray station, and I'm like, that's where she's going, right? And then I'll spend, a few days learning all I can about the cosmic ray station and what it looks like now and what's happening. And then I contacted Toby Smith, who's the photographer who's gone there many times and done it, right, to find out what does it feel like there, right, and this kind of thing. So a lot of research as I go. But also I want to say that I have read about this region and this area and all of this for decades, right? So it's not like I sat down and I'm like, I'm going to write about Chernobyl in Russia and I know nothing about it, right? So it's years of reading, but then very specific research in the moment.
Yeah. And that I feel I believe that if you're onto something that's real and organic and working, that those serendipitous things happen, right? And if you're not onto something that is not, if you're onto something that's not really working, that doesn't happen as much because I've been there, right? I've been researching something and I'm not getting those sort of signs from that National Geographic thing. That doesn't happen as much if you're not onto something, right? So clearly you were onto something here, and with your other projects, and as you said, you've been steeped in this stuff, your whole life, and it's obviously paid incredible dividends. So congratulations again.
Thank
so
you.
Happy for you, so proud of you. Everyone get the book, get another copy.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chris and Evie and the Booksmith and everyone. everyone who's here. It really takes like a humongous team to publish a book. So many of you are authors and you know, right? And like even someone that you can call and be like, listen to what happened. And so many of you are out there that are these people for me, and just thank you. Thank you, everybody.
I just want to remind everybody that we are lining up this way if you would like to have your book signed, and I will be selling them in the back. So thank you all for coming.